I had just returned from a 2-week fishing trip, my bones aching from the long drive, craving nothing more than the sanctuary of my own bed. But when I pushed open the heavy double doors of my master suite, my bed was completely gone. In fact, everything I owned was gone. Standing by the window sipping an iced coffee was my daughter-in-law. She did not look sorry. She smirked at me and said, "We redecorated. This room is mine now." I did not yell. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked her dead in the eye and replied, "You want your own space? Perfect. You can find a new place to live today." The color instantly drained from her face. If you are watching this, please take a deep breath, because what I am about to tell you is a story of ultimate betrayal, corporate revenge, and a harsh lesson in why you should never mistake an old man's kindness for weakness. If you have ever been taken advantage of by your own flesh and blood, please hit the like button. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. It brings me a lot of comfort to know who is listening to my story today. My name is Harrison Caldwell. I am 70 years old. For 40 years, I worked as a commercial real estate developer in the ruthless corporate markets of Denver, Colorado. I spent decades negotiating contracts, reading complex blueprints, and battling aggressive contractors to build a life of absolute security for my family. I did not inherit a single dime. I built my fortune with my own 2 hands, alongside the only woman I ever truly loved, my late wife, Evelyn. Evelyn and I built our sprawling, multi-generational estate in the affluent Denver suburbs entirely from scratch. Every stone in the fireplace, every beam in the ceiling, and every plank of Brazilian walnut flooring was chosen by us. We poured our souls into this property. It was not just a piece of real estate. It was a monument to our marriage, a sanctuary designed to hold our family together for generations. When Evelyn passed away 5 years ago from a sudden aggressive battle with breast cancer, this house became the only tangible piece of her I had left to hold on to. My son Derek is 35 years old. I paid his full out-of-state tuition at the University of Colorado, so he would graduate without a single cent of student debt. 3 years ago, when he and his new wife Monica claimed they were struggling to save for a down payment on their own house, I opened my doors to them. I told them they could live in the east wing of my estate entirely rent-free. I covered the utilities. I paid for the groceries. I wanted to give my son the ultimate head start in life. I wanted to be the generous, supportive father. I never imagined that my generosity would be weaponized against me. The heavy thud of my worn leather boots echoed loudly against the hardwood floor of the main hallway. I had just driven 12 hours straight from a remote river in Montana. For 2 weeks, I had been standing waist-deep in freezing water, fly fishing for trout. It was a pilgrimage I used to make with Evelyn every single autumn, and I continued the tradition to honor her memory. The drive back through Wyoming had been punishing. The highway traffic was completely stalled, and my lower back was screaming with that deep, agonizing stiffness that only a 70-year-old man truly understands. All I wanted in the entire world was a hot shower and the familiar, unyielding comfort of my grandfather's heavy antique oak bed. That bed was a sacred family heirloom. It had been carved by hand in 1922. It survived the Great Depression. It survived decades of moves, and it had been the centerpiece of my master suite on the ground floor since the day Evelyn and I moved in. I dropped my heavy canvas duffel bag by the front entryway, too exhausted to even call out a greeting. The house was quiet. I assumed Derek and Monica were either out at a trendy brunch or lounging by the pool. I dragged my tired legs down the hallway and pushed open the heavy oak double doors of my master suite, expecting the familiar, comforting scent of cedar wood and Evelyn's lingering lavender perfume. Instead, the sharp, harsh chemical odor of fresh paint aggressively assaulted my nostrils. I froze in the doorway. My brain completely stalled, refusing to process the visual information my eyes were sending it. The room had been completely, violently gutted. My grandfather's antique oak bed was gone. Evelyn's beautiful mahogany dressers, the ones I had painstakingly restored by hand over 3 months, were entirely missing. The warm earth-toned walls that Evelyn had specifically chosen to catch the morning sunlight had been painted over with a sterile, blinding hospital white. In place of my history, the room was filled with cold, soulless, minimalist furniture. A low-profile, cheap platform bed sat where my grandfather's legacy used to be. A modern glass desk stood exactly where Evelyn's antique vanity had rested for 2 decades. The thick hand-woven Persian rug we bought on our 10th wedding anniversary had been ripped out, replaced by a stark industrial gray carpet. The room looked like a cheap showroom for a modern furniture catalog. I stood there paralyzed, my calloused hand still gripping the cold brass door handle. The erasure of my life was so sudden, so incredibly violent, that I literally forgot how to breathe. This was not just a bedroom. It was the room where Evelyn took her last breath while holding my hand. It was the only place on this earth where I still felt safe, and someone had taken a wrecking ball to it while I was miles away in the mountains seeking peace. That is when I noticed her. Monica was standing by the large bay window that overlooked the rose gardens. She was 32 years old, wearing expensive designer yoga pants and a silk top that I had undoubtedly paid for indirectly. She was holding a plastic cup of iced coffee, the condensation dripping onto the new carpet. She did not jump when I opened the door. She did not look startled, and she certainly did not look apologetic. She slowly turned to face me, taking a long, deliberate sip from her plastic straw. She looked me up and down, her eyes lazily scanning my dusty fishing vest, my unkempt beard, and my exhausted posture. Then she smirked. It was not a nervous smile to diffuse the tension. It was a cold, highly calculated expression of pure, unadulterated arrogance. "We redecorated," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly, sweet condescension that echoed off the bare walls. "This room is mine now. You know, Harrison, since your knees are getting so bad lately, we figured you would be much more comfortable in the smaller guest room down the hall. Less space to manage. Plus, I really needed the natural light in here for my new morning wellness routine. It is just so much better for my energy." I stared at my daughter-in-law. I looked at the absolute audacity radiating from her posture. For 3 entire years, I had watched delivery packages pile up at my front door, paid for with my son's dwindling salary while they lived rent-free. I had listened to her complain about the landscaping of my estate. I had endured her rolling her eyes whenever I spoke about my past. She treated my home like a luxury resort, and she treated me like the annoying, outdated hotel manager who was constantly in her way. But this was not just disrespect. This was an invasion. She had crossed a boundary that could never, ever be uncrossed. I felt a slow, burning heat rise deep within my chest. It was not the fiery, explosive anger of a young man who loses his temper. It was the cold, absolute, terrifying rage of a man who had spent 40 years systematically destroying arrogant rivals in the corporate boardroom. In that split second, I stopped viewing Monica as my daughter-in-law. I stopped viewing her as family. I viewed her exactly as I would view a hostile corporate takeover. She was a liability, a threat to my assets, and she needed to be neutralized. I did not yell. I did not scream. I did not throw my heavy duffel bag across the room. I let the terrible silence stretch for 5 agonizing seconds, forcing her to squirm under my unblinking gaze. The air in the room grew suffocatingly thick. I could see a tiny flicker of uncertainty finally register in her eyes. Finally, I lowered my voice to a calm, deadly whisper. "You want your own space?" I asked, stepping fully into the room, my presence instantly dwarfing her. She blinked, her arrogant smirk faltering just a fraction of an inch. She shifted her weight nervously. "Well, yes, Harrison," she stammered slightly, her voice losing its sweet edge. "We just thought that since you are getting older, it made more sense for us to take the master." "Perfect," I interrupted her, my voice sharp and unforgiving as a razor. "You can find a new place to live today." The silence that followed was absolute. The color instantly and completely drained from Monica's face. The smug, entitled smirk melted away, instantly replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The plastic coffee cup in her hand trembled visibly, the ice cubes rattling against the sides. She had expected an argument. She had expected me to complain, to act like the clueless, helpless old fossil she truly believed I was. She never expected the owner of the house to instantly, ruthlessly evict her on the spot. Just as she took a shaky breath to defend herself, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. My son Derek rushed into the room, his face pale and slick with sweat. He looked at me, then at Monica, and realized instantly that the situation had completely imploded. And that is when the real lies began. Derek burst through the doorway, his chest heaving as if he had just sprinted up a flight of stairs. His face, usually tanned and relaxed from weekend golf trips I inadvertently subsidized, was now a pale, sickly shade of gray. He was sweating. Tiny beads of moisture glistened on his forehead, beneath the recessed lighting of the gutted master suite. He stepped swiftly between Monica and me, holding his hands up in a placating gesture, wearing the panicked expression of a child caught stealing from the cash register. He looked at his wife, whose arrogant posture had entirely collapsed into rigid fear. And then he looked back at me, his eyes darting frantically around the room as his mind worked in overdrive to construct a safety net. "Dad, hold on. Just wait a minute," Derek stammered, his voice pitching an octave higher than usual. His nervous laugh was hollow, echoing uncomfortably against the bare, freshly painted white walls. "You are completely misunderstanding the situation." Monica simply misspoke. "She is just overwhelmed right now. Please do not be upset. We did not take your room. We are doing all of this for you." I maintained my silence, keeping my posture completely still, allowing him the space to dig his own grave with whatever fabrication he was about to deploy. I watched his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard, trying to summon the confident corporate tone he used when trying to close a minor real estate deal at my firm. "It is for your 70th birthday next week," Derek continued, his words rushing out in a desperate torrent. "It was supposed to be a surprise, but you came back from Montana a day early. We spoke to Dr. Evans a few weeks ago. He mentioned how much you have been struggling with your lower back, especially after these long fishing trips. He strongly recommended a specialized medical-grade ergonomic mattress. We ordered a custom one for you. It is top of the line, Dad, but the delivery requires a completely different bed frame." He paused, wiping his slick palms against his expensive denim jeans. I did not blink. I let the silence hang, forcing him to keep filling the void. "We could not possibly throw away grandfather's antique oak bed," Derek rushed to explain, gesturing vaguely down the hallway. "That bed is a priceless family heirloom. We wanted to preserve it properly. So we carefully disassembled it and moved it into the guest suite at the end of the east wing. It fits perfectly in there. The environment is climate-controlled, and it will be kept completely safe from daily wear and tear. We set up the guest room to be your temporary sleeping quarters just for a few days, while the new ergonomic setup is finalized in here." At this point, Monica finally managed to locate her voice. She stepped out from behind my son, her previous smirk entirely replaced by a mask of manufactured sugary sweetness. Her tone shifted into the high-pitched, patronizing register people often use when speaking to a confused toddler or a dementia patient. "Exactly?" Harris and Monica chimed in, stepping forward to gently touch Derek's arm, presenting a united front. "I am so sorry if my words came out wrong. I was just startled. When I said this space was mine, I only meant temporarily. I have this massive, overwhelming project for my new wellness brand, and I needed a large area with natural light to lay out all my materials and inventory just for a week or two. Once your custom mattress arrives and the new frame is installed, we will clear all my project materials out, and you can move right back in. We are just trying to take care of your health. You have done so much for us. We wanted to finally do something for you." I stood in the center of the gutted room, listening to the synchronized rhythm of their deception. My son and my daughter-in-law were standing in my house looking me directly in the eye and lying to my face with the practiced ease of seasoned con artists. My mind instantly began to weave through the historical context of my relationship with Derek. I looked at this 35-year-old man, and I remembered writing the exorbitant checks for his full out-of-state tuition at the University of Colorado. I paid every single dime so that he would not have to start his adult life carrying the crushing weight of student loans. When he graduated with a degree in communications, a degree he barely utilized, I helped him secure his first job. 3 years ago, when he and Monica were newly married and crying about the harsh realities of the Denver real estate market, I did what any loving father would do. I offered them sanctuary. They sat across from me at my dining table, shedding crocodile tears about how they could never afford a decent down payment. I told them they could move into the east wing of my estate. I told them they could live there entirely rent-free for 2 years. The strict condition of our verbal agreement was that they would bank every single dollar they would have spent on rent, aggressively saving for a substantial down payment on a modest starter home. I honored my end of the bargain. I paid the property taxes. I paid the exorbitant heating and cooling bills. I paid for the high-speed internet. I even paid for the majority of the groceries, stocking the refrigerator with premium organic food because Monica claimed she had specific dietary requirements. And how did they honor their end of the bargain by treating my estate like a free luxury resort? I watched the delivery trucks arrive daily, dropping off designer clothing, expensive shoes, and high-end electronics. I watched them take lavish weekend ski trips to Aspen. I watched them lease brand-new luxury vehicles they absolutely did not need. They saved nothing. They simply expanded their lifestyle to consume the massive financial breathing room I had provided. And now they were standing in the ruins of the bedroom, where my wife took her final breath, treating me like an incompetent fool. Derek's eyes were shifting rapidly. His body language was a textbook display of guilt and deception. He was swaying slightly from side to side, unable to maintain prolonged eye contact. He was waiting for my explosion. He was bracing for the furious wrath of a commercial real estate developer who made a living out of destroying liars. But I knew that if I exploded, if I screamed and demanded they leave my property right this second, they would immediately pivot to a new strategy. They would tell the rest of the family that my mind was slipping. They would tell my friends that I was becoming paranoid, hostile, and irrational due to advanced age. They would use my righteous anger to build a narrative of my supposed mental decline. So I deployed the silent trap. I actively suppressed the cold, calculating businessman within me. I deliberately rounded my shoulders, allowing my posture to slump slightly, mimicking the physical exhaustion of an old, weary man. I softened my gaze, letting the sharp, piercing intensity drain from my eyes. I looked down at the industrial gray carpet, then back up at my son, letting a look of mild, befuddled relief wash over my face. I let out a long, trembling sigh, performing the role of the confused but grateful elder to absolute perfection. I murmured, my voice deliberately shaky and quiet. I completely misunderstood. I am so sorry, Monica. I was just so exhausted from the drive. The traffic was terrible and my back was hurting so much. When I saw the room empty, I just panicked. I thought something terrible had happened. The collective sigh of relief from Derek and Monica was so profound, it practically sucked the oxygen out of the room. Derek's shoulders instantly dropped, and the color began to return to his face. He stepped forward and placed a reassuring, patronizing hand on my shoulder. "It is completely fine, Dad," Derek said, his voice dripping with newly recovered confidence. "We know you are tired. You drove a long way. It was a shock, that is all. Why do you not just go down to the guest suite, take a hot shower, and get some rest? We will order your favorite takeout for dinner tonight." "Thank you, son," I said, looking at him with wide, innocent eyes. "That is very thoughtful of you both. I really appreciate you looking out for my health." I turned my back on them, gripping the strap of my heavy duffel bag, and slowly shuffled down the hallway toward the east wing. I kept my steps measured and heavy, playing the part until I was completely out of their sightline. As I walked, I could hear them whispering furiously behind the closed doors of what used to be my sanctuary, likely congratulating themselves on how easily they had managed to pacify the clueless old man. I reached the guest suite at the end of the hall and pushed the door open. It was a cramped secondary bedroom overlooking the driveway. They had indeed shoved my grandfather's massive antique oak bed into the corner of the room. It barely fit, pressed awkwardly against the wall, stripped of its dignity. Boxes of my personal belongings, my books, my photographs, and Evelyn's keepsakes were stacked haphazardly in the corner, treated like discarded junk rather than the accumulated treasures of a lifetime. I set my bag down and locked the door behind me. The moment the lock clicked, the facade of the frail, confused old man vanished entirely. I straightened my spine. I rolled my shoulders back, the physical exhaustion of the long drive instantly replaced by a surging, hyper-focused adrenaline. I sat on the edge of the antique mattress in the dim light of the cramped guest room. The house settled around me, the wooden beams groaning softly in the evening breeze. The lie had been told smoothly and confidently, but my gut was absolutely screaming. The pieces did not fit. You do not paint a room blinding white and rip out an expensive Persian rug just to lay out materials for a temporary project. You do not strip a room of its history just to deliver an ergonomic mattress. My son was hiding something massive. They were claiming territory. They were establishing dominance in my home while acting under the guise of familial care. It was the classic opening maneuver of a hostile takeover. I sat there in the silence, staring at the boxes of my life shoved into the corner. A line had been crossed today. A fundamental covenant of respect and trust had been entirely shattered. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought I was comfortably neutralized. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea that beneath the gray hair and the weary posture, the ruthless developer who built an empire from nothing was wide awake and preparing for war. The first domino had just fallen, and I was going to ensure that when the rest of them collapsed, they would crush the people who thought they could steal my home. The digital clock on the cramped nightstand glowed with a harsh red light. It was exactly 2 a.m. The sprawling estate was dead silent, save for the low rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning unit and the occasional settling of the ancient wooden foundation. I lay perfectly still on the antique oak mattress they had shoved into this secondary bedroom. My body was completely exhausted from the long drive across state lines, but my mind was racing at a terrifying speed. Sleep was an absolute impossibility. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Monica standing in my gutted sanctuary, sipping her iced coffee with that smug, entitled expression. I saw my son sweating, spinning a frantic web of lies about ergonomic mattresses and temporary wellness projects. I threw off the thin blanket and swung my legs over the edge of the bed. My bare feet hit the cold floor. I did not turn on the lamps. I knew the layout of this house by heart. I had walked these halls for decades. I crept out of the guest suite and moved silently down the long, shadowed corridor toward the main living area. As I walked, my mind seamlessly shifted gears. I stopped being the grieving widower and the disappointed father. I became the man who had survived and conquered the brutal, unforgiving world of commercial real estate development for 40 years. In my industry, you do not survive 4 decades by trusting a sweaty, fast-talking partner who refuses to make eye contact. You survive by reading the micro-expressions, analyzing the inconsistencies, and trusting the cold, hard data over the emotional pitch. I knew exactly what a desperate person looked like. I had seen that exact same frantic energy in the eyes of failing contractors begging for an advance. I had seen it in the posture of bankrupt investors trying to hide their insolvency during a final negotiation. Derek possessed all the classic symptoms of a man who was deeply leveraged and running out of time. He was not merely covering up a disrespectful interior design choice. He was actively running interference for a much larger, much more dangerous operation. I needed to know exactly what my son was protecting. I reached the ground floor and bypassed the newly furnished living room, heading straight for the heavy mahogany door of my private home office. I closed the office door behind me and locked it. I drew the heavy velvet curtains shut before clicking on the small brass desk lamp. This room was the only space in the house they had not dared to touch. My architectural blueprints were still rolled neatly in their leather tubes. The framed photographs of Evelyn and me cutting the ribbon at our very first commercial plaza still hung securely on the wood-paneled walls. This room was the nerve center of the Caldwell legacy. It was here that I had meticulously planned our financial security. And it was here that the answers to Derek and Monica's sudden audacity resided. I walked around my massive mahogany desk and knelt on the intricately patterned rug. I pulled back the corner of the heavy fabric to reveal the solid steel floor, safe set flush into the concrete foundation. Evelyn and I had purchased this specific model back in 1995, right after our firm closed its first $1 million deal. We wanted a secure, impenetrable fortress to hold our most vital documents, our emergency cash reserves, and the physical proof of our hard-earned success. It was a heavy, old-fashioned dial combination safe. It did not rely on batteries, digital keypads, or easily hacked software. It required a precise physical sequence of numbers that only 2 people in the world knew. Evelyn took her knowledge of the combination to the grave. I was the only one left. I reached down to spin the heavy metal dial, but my hand stopped inches from the cold steel. I leaned in closer, my breathing suddenly shallow. The soft ambient light from the desk lamp illuminated a series of deep, frantic gouges etched into the thick metallic casing surrounding the dial. Fresh, jagged scratch marks marred the dark painted surface. They were erratic and aggressive. Someone had taken a heavy tool, perhaps a hardened steel flathead screwdriver or a crowbar, and desperately attempted to pry the dial mechanism straight off its axis. I traced the violent scratches with my index finger, feeling the rough, damaged metal. The sheer panic and brute force required to inflict this kind of damage told a very clear story. Whoever did this was completely terrified and entirely out of time. But the pry marks were only the beginning of the horror. The heavy steel dial had held firm against the physical assault. The safe was not compromised by force. It was compromised by proximity and observation. I realized with a sickening clarity that the intruder, having failed to break the lock, must have systematically guessed the combination. Or worse, they had quietly observed me over the past few years, carefully watching the subtle movements of my hands from the doorway, while pretending to ask a casual question, silently memorizing the sequence of numbers until they had the exact code. My heart hammered a slow, painful rhythm against my ribs. I placed my trembling hand on the cold dial and initiated the sequence. 3 turns to the left, 2 turns to the right, 1 final turn to the left. The heavy internal tumblers fell into place with a loud, definitive mechanical click. I grabbed the sturdy steel handle and pulled the thick door upward on its perfectly balanced hinges. The interior of the safe was dark, cool, and smelled faintly of old paper and aged leather. I reached inside my mind, bracing for the absolute worst scenario. I conducted a rapid, methodical inventory of the contents. The thick, banded stacks of emergency $100 bills were resting exactly where I had left them, in the back left corner. I moved my hand to the right side. The velvet jewelry boxes were perfectly aligned. I opened the largest box to find Evelyn's flawless diamond anniversary necklace and her cherished string of authentic saltwater pearls gleaming untouched against the dark fabric. The intruder had not taken a single dollar of the cash. They had completely ignored tens of thousands of dollars worth of highly untraceable, easily pawned vintage jewelry. This was not a standard robbery. This was a targeted, highly specific extraction. I shifted my focus to the central compartment, the space designated exclusively for our most critical legal and financial records. My hands moved through the neatly organized stacks of life insurance policies, birth certificates, and long-term corporate bond certificates. Everything appeared to be in its correct place. But as my fingers reached the very bottom of the stack, they met the cold, bare steel of the safe floor. I froze. I pulled the remaining documents out and spread them frantically across the carpet. I searched again, my hands moving faster, my pulse roaring in my ears like a freight train. It was gone. The thick, heavy blue manila folder that had rested at the bottom of this safe for over a decade was completely missing. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of absolute nausea wash over me as the full, horrifying reality of the situation locked into place. That specific blue folder did not contain cash stocks or jewelry. It contained something infinitely more valuable and infinitely more dangerous in the wrong hands. It contained the original notarized property deeds to this sprawling estate. The pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped together in my mind, forming a picture so vile I could barely comprehend it. Monica had not just claimed my bedroom out of some petty desire for natural light. Derek had not just lied to me to cover up a minor interior design disagreement. They had violated the ultimate sanctuary of my home to steal the very foundation of my legacy. The first domino had fallen the moment Monica smirked and declared my master suite was hers. But this missing blue folder was the second domino, revealing a crime that went far beyond mere disrespect. They needed the original deeds for a specific calculated purpose. My own flesh and blood had robbed me in the dead of night. I knew that whoever possessed those documents held the literal keys to an empire I had spent 40 years building. They were not just stealing a physical house. They were stealing my life's work, my retirement, and my entire history. I needed to act very swiftly and ruthlessly. There was absolutely no room for hesitation or parental sentimentality left inside me. I took a deep, steadying breath to calm my nerves. I sat alone in the dark office, clutching the empty space where my future used to be, and prepared to uncover exactly what my son had done with my property. I slowly stood up from the floor, my joints protesting the movement after kneeling on the cold concrete for so long. I pushed the heavy steel door of the safe closed and spun the dial, securing the remaining contents. My breathing was remarkably steady now. The initial shock had entirely evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I walked over to my massive mahogany desk and sat down in the high-backed leather chair. I reached forward and pressed the power button on my desktop computer. The machine hummed to life, the cooling fans spinning up with a low, rhythmic drone that filled the silent office. The large monitor illuminated my face with a harsh, bright light, casting long shadows against the wood-paneled walls. I rested my hands on the keyboard, my fingers hovering over the keys. For 40 years, I had navigated the brutal, complex world of commercial real estate development in Denver, Colorado. I had spent decades analyzing zoning laws, securing massive commercial loans, and scrutinizing thousands of pages of property deeds. I knew the bureaucratic systems of this city better than I knew the back of my own hand. Finding a missing property record was not a challenge for me. It was simply muscle memory. I opened the web browser and navigated straight to the Denver County Clerk and Recorder online portal. I did not need to look up the web address or search for instructions. I had used this exact database countless times to research potential commercial acquisitions and verify property liens before closing multi-million-dollar deals. The website loaded instantly. I clicked on the Public Records search tab. My fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard as I typed in the exact parcel number and the physical address of my sprawling $2.8 million estate. I hit the search key and leaned back in my leather chair, waiting for the system to retrieve the historical filing data for my home. The small loading icon spun on the screen for 3 agonizing seconds. Those 3 seconds felt like an absolute eternity. My mind rapidly calculated all the possible scenarios. Perhaps they had taken out a secondary mortgage. Perhaps they had filed a lien against the property using my name as collateral. But what loaded on the screen was infinitely worse than anything I could have ever anticipated. The search results populated in a neat chronological list, displaying every single legal document associated with my property since the day Evelyn and I purchased the vacant lot over 30 years ago. I saw the original warranty deed from when we bought the land. I saw the construction permits we filed when we built the house. I saw the documents confirming the mortgage was completely paid off in full 15 years ago. a milestone Evelyn and I had celebrated with a quiet dinner at our favorite restaurant. My eyes scanned past all of those historical markers, moving directly to the very top of the list. There was a new brightly highlighted entry. The filing date sent a jagged spike of ice straight through my veins. The document had been officially recorded and processed exactly 2 days ago. 2 days ago, I was standing waist-deep in a freezing river in Montana, completely disconnected from the world fly fishing for trout. I had zero cell phone service. I had zero access to email. I was perfectly intentionally isolated. They knew my schedule perfectly. They knew exactly when I would be completely unreachable. I looked at the document type listed in the second column of the search results. It read, "Quitclaim deed." As a retired commercial real estate developer, those 2 words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. A quitclaim deed is a legal instrument used to quickly transfer any ownership interest a person has in a piece of property to someone else. It offers absolutely no warranties or guarantees. It is typically used between trusted family members to swiftly transfer assets without conducting a traditional sale. It is the fastest, quietest way to hand over a house. I slowly grabbed the mouse, my hand trembling slightly, and clicked the digital hyperlink to open the scanned image of the original document. The high-resolution PDF loaded onto my screen, filling the entire monitor with crisp black and white legal text. I read the first paragraph. I read it twice, refusing to believe my own eyes. The document legally transferred 100% of the ownership rights of my $2.8 million estate out of my name. The grantee, the person receiving total ownership of my life's work, was not my son. It was not a joint tenancy between Derek and his wife. The property was transferred solely and exclusively into the name of Monica Caldwell. She had taken everything. My son had allowed his wife to completely sever his own father from the family legacy, putting the ultimate asset entirely under her control. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the maneuver was absolutely staggering. They had not just claimed a bedroom. They had legally stolen the entire castle. I scrolled down the digital page, my eyes scanning the standard legal jargon, looking for the specific details of the transaction. The consideration amount, the price allegedly paid for the transfer of a sprawling luxury estate, was listed as $10. $10 for the home where I raised my family. $10 for the garden where Evelyn planted her roses. $10 for 40 years of my blood, sweat, and tears. I continued scrolling until I reached the final page of the document, the signature section. This was the moment of absolute truth. A quitclaim deed requires the notarized signature of the grantor to be legally binding. I zoomed in on the scanned image, focusing entirely on the bottom right corner of the page. There, resting on the solid black line above my printed name, was my signature. I stared at it for a long, silent moment. It was an exceptionally good forgery. The loops of the capital letters were nearly perfect. The slight rightward slant matched my handwriting beautifully. The pressure points simulated the way I drag my pen across the paper. But it was not my signature. I knew the subtle, microscopic imperfections of my own handwriting. I knew that I always leave a tiny gap between the first and second letters of my first name. The forgery was perfectly connected. Derek had practiced this. My own son had sat down with a stack of my old documents, perhaps my canceled checks or old birthday cards, and painstakingly practiced forging his father's signature over and over again on blank pieces of scrap paper until he could replicate it absolutely perfectly well enough to fool a county clerk. But a forged signature alone cannot record a deed. It requires official verification. I moved my eyes slightly to the left of the fraudulent signature. There, stamped clearly in blue ink, was the official seal of a public notary. I read the name on the stamp. It belonged to a man I vaguely recognized, an old college fraternity brother of Derek's, who worked at a shady title company downtown. They had not just forged a document. They had conspired with a corrupt notary public to place an official government seal on a fraudulent property transfer. The severity of the situation crystallized in my mind with terrifying clarity. We had officially crossed a massive, irreversible boundary. This was no longer a disrespectful family dispute over interior decorating. This was no longer a case of ungrateful children taking advantage of a generous father's hospitality. This was a highly coordinated, premeditated, multi-tiered criminal conspiracy. This was felony fraud, grand theft, and conspiracy to commit a crime. My son and my daughter-in-law had legally crossed into territory that carried mandatory federal prison sentences. They thought I was a clueless old man who would simply fade away quietly into the guest room while they took over my kingdom. They did not realize they had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to absolutely destroy their lives. I leaned back in my leather chair and stared at the glowing monitor, the forged deed illuminating the dark office. My mind began to rapidly formulate the precise legal strategy I would employ to utterly dismantle their arrogant, reckless theft. I reached out and clicked the print button, listening to the machine hum as it produced physical evidence of their treason. I folded the warm paper, smoothing out the sharp creases with my thumb, placing it safely inside my breast pocket. The trap was now fully armed, and I was going to absolutely enjoy watching them walk blindly right into the exact center of it. If you've ever felt the cold sting of betrayal from your own flesh and blood, please hit the like button. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. The morning sun filtered through the narrow window of the guest suite, casting long, pale beams across the unfamiliar industrial carpet. I had not slept a single minute. My mind had spent the remaining hours of the night categorizing evidence and structuring a flawless counteroffensive. I rose from the cramped antique bed, showered, and put on a pair of casual khakis and a simple button-down shirt. I needed to look exactly like the unsuspecting, slightly weary retiree they believed me to be. I walked down the long hallway toward the sprawling gourmet kitchen. The aroma of freshly brewed artisanal coffee and expensive organic bacon filled the air. Evelyn and I had designed this kitchen to be the heart of the home, a warm gathering place for holidays and family celebrations. Now it felt like a staging ground for enemy combatants. Derek was sitting at the massive marble island typing frantically on his laptop. Monica was standing by the state-of-the-art espresso machine scrolling through her phone. When I entered the room, they both froze. The tension was palpable, a thick, suffocating cloud of unspoken guilt hanging between them. I simply smiled. It was a warm, gentle, perfectly practiced smile that conveyed absolute ignorance. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady and light. I walked over to the refrigerator, poured myself a glass of orange juice, and took a seat across from my son. I calmly plated a serving of scrambled eggs and bacon, eating with deliberate, unhurried precision. Derek watched me from the corner of his eye, his shoulders rigid. "Dad, how did you sleep?" he finally asked, his voice betraying a faint tremor of anxiety. "I slept wonderfully, son," I replied, taking a slow sip of my juice. "That guest room is remarkably quiet. I think the temporary move was actually a blessing in disguise." The collective exhalation of breath from across the kitchen island was almost comical. Monica visibly relaxed her posture, softening as she returned to her phone. I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin and set it down. Actually, I continued keeping my tone entirely casual. I was thinking about taking a little drive up to Boulder for the weekend. My old fraternity brother Richard recently had knee surgery, and I thought I would go keep him company for a couple of days. It will get me out of your hair while you finish setting up the new mattress and sorting out Monica's wellness project. I watched their faces closely. The sheer, overwhelming relief that washed over them was immediate and profound. Derek closed his laptop with a sharp snap. "That sounds like a great idea, Dad," he said, his enthusiasm entirely forced. "You should go relax. Have a great time with Richard. Take as long as you need." Monica chimed in, offering a sickeningly sweet smile. "Drive safely, Harrison. Do not worry about a thing here. We have everything completely under control." I nodded, thanking them for their supposed consideration. I walked back to the guest suite and packed a small leather overnight bag. I did not pack fishing gear or casual clothes for a weekend in the mountains. I packed 2 crisp, custom-tailored business suits, a selection of silk ties, and my encrypted external hard drive. I slung the bag over my shoulder, walked out the front door, and climbed into the driver's seat of my luxury sedan. I backed out of the long circular driveway, watching my own house shrink in the rearview mirror. The moment my tires hit the main road, the facade of the harmless grandfather completely evaporated. I did not turn my steering wheel north toward the winding mountain roads of Boulder. I merged onto the interstate and headed straight south, driving directly into the towering glass and steel heart of downtown Denver. The morning commute was a chaotic sea of brake lights and aggressive drivers, but I navigated the urban landscape with the cold, mechanical precision of a predator hunting its prey. As the towering skyscrapers grew larger against the crisp Colorado sky, my mind sharpened. I was no longer a grieving widower or a disappointed parent. I was a veteran commercial real estate developer moving to protect his empire. The sprawling suburban estate I had just left was not just a home. It was a multi-million-dollar asset, and it had been stolen by a pair of arrogant, entitled amateurs. They thought they were playing a clever game of chess. They did not realize they had just stepped into a financial war zone against a man who had spent 40 years writing the rules of engagement. I pulled my vehicle into the secure underground parking garage of a sleek, modern, high-rise building located in the city's most exclusive financial district. I took the private elevator straight up to the top floor. The doors opened silently into a sprawling, immaculate reception area lined with imported Italian marble and polished dark wood. The receptionist recognized me instantly and waved me straight through without a word. I walked down the quiet, carpeted hallway and pushed open the heavy oak doors to the corner office. Behind a massive custom-built glass desk sat Mitchell Barnes. Mitchell was my ruthless, razor-sharp corporate attorney. We had fought side by side in the legal trenches for nearly 3 decades. He was a brilliant, predatory legal mind who specialized in dismantling hostile corporate takeovers and destroying fraudulent litigation. He was not a man who dealt in emotions or family sentiments. He dealt exclusively in facts, leverage, and absolute victory. Mitchell looked up from his paperwork, his sharp gray eyes instantly recognizing the gravity of my unannounced arrival. "Harrison," he said, setting his gold fountain pen down on the desk. "You look like a man preparing to burn something to the very ground. Please sit." I did not exchange pleasantries. I walked straight to his desk, reached into my breast pocket, and pulled out the sharply creased, freshly printed document I had generated the night before. I smoothed the paper out and slid it directly across the smooth glass surface, stopping it exactly in front of him. I sat down in the leather chair opposite his desk and waited. Mitchell picked up the document. The room was absolutely silent as his eyes scanned the legal text. I watched his expression shift from professional curiosity to cold, hardened recognition. He looked at the grantee name. He looked at the purchase amount of $10. Finally, his eyes locked onto the forged signature and the blue notary stamp at the bottom of the page. Mitchell slowly lowered the paper, resting his forearms on the desk. He looked at me, his expression perfectly composed but radiating intense analytical focus. "This was filed 2 days ago," he stated, his voice flat and devoid of any inflection. "Yes," I replied, my tone matching his absolute seriousness. "I was standing in a river in Montana when this was officially recorded. My son and my daughter-in-law have forged my signature, corrupted a public notary, and attempted to legally steal a $2.8 million asset." Mitchell leaned back in his expensive chair, steepling his fingers together. "The forgery is exceptionally well executed," he observed calmly. "If we call the Denver Police Department right now and report this as a felony theft, your son will immediately deploy a defensive counter-narrative. He will claim that you signed this document willingly. He will tell the authorities that you are suffering from early-onset dementia, that your memory is rapidly failing, and that you simply forgot authorizing the transfer to protect the family estate." He will paint you as a confused, deteriorating old man making false accusations. I nodded slowly. I had already anticipated that exact maneuver. That is precisely why I came to you instead of the authorities, I said. We are not going to call the police today. If we enter a, she said, legal battle involving claims of cognitive decline, this could drag out in the probate and civil courts for years. They will drain my resources trying to prove my incompetence. I refuse to engage in a prolonged defensive war. I want to completely and utterly annihilate their position in a single devastating strike. We need airtight, irrefutable ammunition. We need to document their true intentions and their criminal conspiracy so thoroughly that no defense attorney in the state of Colorado would ever dare represent them. Mitchell smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile that indicated he was already mentally drafting the destruction of my son's future. You want to let them believe they have won, he said softly. You want to give them enough rope to hang themselves completely. Exactly, I replied. I want to document their arrogance. I want to uncover the underlying motive. Why do they need the deed in her name right now? There is a larger financial play happening here, and I need to know what it is before I drop the hammer. Mitchell turned to his computer and began typing rapidly. If we are going to build an impenetrable case, we cannot rely solely on a forged signature, he explained. We need surveillance. We need audio recordings of their admissions. We need a covert setup inside that house that captures their conspiracy in real time. We are going to build a cage so tight that when the doors finally close, they will not even be able to breathe. Mitchell handed me a heavy embossed business card containing only a first name and a phone number. He told me the man was a former intelligence contractor, specializing in discreet residential surveillance. I called the number from the lobby of Mitchell's building. The voice on the other end was professional sharp and asked absolutely no unnecessary questions. We arranged to meet in the parking lot of a quiet suburban strip mall just 3 miles from my estate. I arrived 30 minutes later. A nondescript gray utility van pulled up perfectly parallel to my vehicle. A meticulously organized man named Gregory stepped out carrying a rugged hard-shell equipment case. I explained the exact layout of my property and the precise angles I needed to capture. Gregory listened intently, pulling up a digital blueprint of my neighborhood on his encrypted tablet. He assured me the installation would take less than 45 minutes once the property was entirely vacant. Now we simply had to wait for the thieves to leave the castle. I parked my car down the street from my own home, concealed beneath the heavy shade of a mature oak tree. Gregory parked his van 2 blocks over, maintaining constant radio contact with me through a secure earpiece. We sat in total silence for 2 agonizing hours. My patience was a muscle that had been trained over decades of brutal real estate negotiations. I could wait all day. Finally, at precisely 7 o'clock in the evening, the massive wrought iron gates of my estate slowly swung open. Derek drove out in his newly leased German luxury sedan. Monica was sitting in the passenger seat wearing a shimmering cocktail dress and laughing animatedly. They were heading out to the city, undoubtedly going to an overpriced exclusive restaurant to celebrate their newfound stolen wealth. They looked like 2 people who believed they had just successfully pulled off the heist of the century. They believed they were invincible. I watched their taillights fade into the distance, feeling a cold, dark satisfaction settling deep within my chest. I pressed the button on my radio transmitter and gave Gregory the signal to move. We approached the property from the rear service entrance. Derek and Monica believed the state-of-the-art perimeter alarm system protected them now. They did not realize I was the one who had programmed the master override codes. I punched a complex 8-digit sequence into the hidden keypad behind the ivy trellis. The heavy security doors unlocked with a soft click. The alarm panel instantly disabled its interior motion sensors, granting us total undetected access to the estate. We stepped into the grand foyer. The house was bathed in the dim golden light of the setting sun. I led Gregory directly into the massive gourmet kitchen. This was the central artery of the house, the place where casual conversations and careless admissions were most likely to occur over morning coffee or evening wine. Gregory opened his hard-shell case and extracted a microscopic high-definition camera. It was no larger than a standard shirt button. He expertly dismantled the casing of a high-end espresso machine that sat on the marble island, seamlessly integrating the tiny lens directly into the digital display panel. It was completely invisible to the naked eye. The camera possessed a highly sensitive, motion-activated microphone capable of picking up a whispered conversation from 30 feet away. Next, we moved into the main living area. This room featured towering vaulted ceilings and expansive floor-to-ceiling windows. It was the space where Derek and Monica entertained their superficial friends lounging on expensive furniture purchased with my money. Gregory scanned the room with a practiced analytical eye. He walked over to a massive custom-built stone fireplace. He embedded the second microscopic camera deep within the intricate masonry of the mantelpiece, angling the lens to capture the entirety of the seating area. He wired the device directly into the wall's electrical current, ensuring it would never run out of battery power. It would record continuously, transmitting a heavily encrypted live video feed directly to a secure cloud server. Finally, we walked down the hallway toward the ground floor master suite. My stomach tightened into a hard, painful knot as I pushed open the heavy double doors. The sterile, blindingly white walls and the cheap minimalist furniture still mocked the memory of the life I had built here. This was the epicenter of their disrespect. This was the room Monica had aggressively claimed as her own territory. I needed to see exactly what she was planning to do in this space. I needed to know why she required this specific room for her so-called wellness project. Gregory moved quickly and efficiently. He selected a high-angle vantage point, mounting the third camera inside the housing of a sleek, modern smoke detector fastened to the ceiling. The vantage point offered a comprehensive, unobstructed view of the entire gutted bedroom. He linked the final device to the encrypted network and ran a rapid diagnostic test on his tablet. He showed me the screen. The high-definition feeds from the kitchen, the living room, and the master suite were broadcasting with absolute crystal-clear perfection. The audio was sharp and isolated, filtering out the ambient background noise of the air conditioning vents. We wiped down every single surface we had touched, ensuring we left absolutely zero physical evidence of our infiltration. We exited through the rear service door, rearming the perimeter security system behind us. The house was once again a sealed fortress, but it was now a fortress completely wired for surveillance. The trap was fully constructed, armed and waiting for the prey to return. I paid Gregory his exorbitant fee in cash, shook his hand, and watched his gray utility van disappear into the quiet suburban night. I stood alone in the driveway for a moment. I did not return to the guest room. I drove across town toward a quiet, highly discreet boutique hotel located on the outskirts of the city. I needed a secure, isolated command center where I could monitor the situation without the constant pressure of acting like the confused father. I parked my car in the underground structure and carried my overnight bag into the lobby. I paid for a week-long reservation in advance using a secondary corporate credit card Derek had no knowledge of. I walked into a pristine corner suite. The hotel room was impersonal, quiet, and perfectly suited for my needs. I locked the heavy door, drew the blackout curtains tightly shut, and placed my encrypted external hard drive on the small wooden writing desk. I opened my laptop and connected to the secure cloud server Gregory had established. I typed in the complex multi-factor authentication passwords. The screen flickered for a brief second, before dividing into 3 separate high-definition video feeds. I sat back in the ergonomic desk chair and stared at the glowing monitor. I was looking directly into the heart of my own home, but I was no longer a participant in the daily life of that household. I had become a digital ghost, haunting my own life's work. The house was empty, the rooms bathed in the artificial glow of security lighting. It was profoundly surreal to watch the silent feeds of the kitchen, where I had cooked thousands of meals, and the living room where I had celebrated countless holidays with Evelyn. I poured myself a glass of cold water and settled into the chair. The waiting game had officially begun. I was a fisherman sitting quietly on the bank of a river, watching the surface, waiting for the inevitable strike. I knew that Derek and Monica would return eventually. I knew they would walk into that house feeling triumphant. They would pour themselves another glass of wine, let their guard down, and begin to speak freely. They believed they had outsmarted a 70-year-old man executing a flawless property theft without leaving a single trace of evidence. They had absolutely no idea that every whispered word and every arrogant smirk was now being recorded and weaponized against them. I watched the digital clock on my laptop screen tick forward. The silence of the room was absolute, a stark contrast to the violent storm of calculation raging inside my mind. I did not feel tired. I did not feel the ache in my lower back or the exhaustion of the past 2 days. The pure adrenaline of the hunt fueled my focus. Suddenly, the motion detection alert on the kitchen camera flashed a bright red warning on my screen. The secure server began recording the audio feed. The heavy front door swung open and the bright overhead lights of the grand foyer flicked on. Derek and Monica walked into the frame completely oblivious to the invisible eyes watching their every move. The trap had officially snapped shut around them. They were completely blind to the fact that their absolute destruction was already in motion, and they were powerless to stop it from happening. Friday night bled into Saturday morning while I remained anchored to the ergonomic chair in my dimly lit hotel room. I watched the live feeds with the unwavering, obsessive dedication of a hawk circling its prey. The initial thrill of successfully establishing the surveillance network slowly settled into a cold, hardened vigilance. I observed my son and daughter-in-law move through my home completely unaware of the digital eyes tracking their every step. They drank my wine, they laughed in my kitchen, and they slept down the hall from the very room they had so violently desecrated. I consumed nothing but black coffee and cold water, keeping my mind incredibly sharp. I was waiting for the hidden agenda to reveal itself, and I did not have to wait very long. As the morning gave way to the early afternoon, a distinct shift in the atmosphere of the house became undeniable. Derek retreated to his home office in the East Wing, closing the door behind him. Monica, however, kicked into a state of high gear. I watched the feed from the master suite as she carried in an adjustable, brightly lit magnifying ring, light the kind professional photographers and estheticians use. She rolled in a stainless steel medical cart. She placed a small, red plastic biohazard disposal bin in the corner of the room. The pieces of the puzzle began to violently snap together in my mind. The sterile, blindingly white walls, the complete removal of all my personal comforting furniture, the installation of a low-profile, easily accessible platform bed. Monica had not gutted my bedroom simply because she disliked the antique decor. She had systematically converted my private sanctuary into an unlicensed underground medical clinic. At precisely 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the motion detector on the rear service entrance triggered a silent alarm on my laptop screen. I switched my focus to the kitchen camera. The heavy oak door swung open, and a woman walked into my home. She was not a friend coming over for a casual weekend lunch. She was a wealthy suburbanite dressed in expensive designer athletic wear, carrying a handbag that likely cost more than my first car. She looked around nervously, her posture tense, moving with the distinct hesitation of someone who knows they are engaging in a highly illicit transaction. Monica greeted her with a wide, practiced, entirely predatory smile. They exchanged brief, hushed pleasantries before Monica led her directly down the hallway and straight into my former master suite. I maximized the video feed from the smoke detector camera, holding my breath as the two women entered the room. Monica directed the client to lie back on the minimalist platform bed. The client closed her eyes, her face bathed in the harsh clinical glare of the circular ring light. I watched in absolute unadulterated horror as my daughter-in-law walked over to the stainless steel medical cart and snapped a pair of tight black nitrile exam gloves onto her hands. She opened a small insulated cooler bag and extracted several tiny glass vials and a handful of individually wrapped hypodermic syringes. My stomach churned violently, a wave of profound nausea washing over me. I knew exactly what Monica's educational background was. She possessed a completely average degree in communications and marketing. She had spent a few years working the front reception desk at a high-end dermatology clinic downtown before marrying my son and deciding she no longer needed to maintain employment. She held absolutely zero medical licenses. She had never attended nursing school. She possessed no formal training in human anatomy pharmacology or emergency medical response. Yet she was standing in the middle of my house casually preparing to inject potent neurotoxins directly into the facial muscles of a living human being. I zoomed in on the high-definition feed, my eyes straining to read the labels on the small glass vials resting on the metal tray. The packaging did not bear the standard, heavily regulated markings of legitimate FDA-approved pharmaceutical distributors. The labels were generic, brightly colored, and printed with foreign text. She was using black-market Botox and unregulated dermal fillers likely purchased in bulk from shady international websites and smuggled across the border to maximize her illicit profit margins. The sheer magnitude of the liability she was creating in my home was staggering. As a commercial real estate developer, I had spent my entire life assessing and mitigating risk. What I was watching was a ticking time bomb of catastrophic legal and financial ruin. One slipped needle, one contaminated vial, one severe allergic reaction, and that woman on the bed could suffer permanent facial paralysis, vascular necrosis, or even anaphylactic shock. If a medical emergency occurred on my property, the ensuing police investigation and inevitable malpractice lawsuits would be absolutely devastating. The authorities would not care that I was out of town. They would look at the forged property deed, they would see my family name attached to the estate, and they would seize every single asset I had ever built to satisfy the judgments. Monica was not just playing doctor. She was playing Russian roulette with my entire life's work, using my family home as her personal, unregulated trap house for cosmetic procedures. I watched my fists clenched so tightly, my knuckles turned white as Monica leaned over the woman and began systematically piercing her forehead, the delicate skin around her eyes, and the contour of her lips with the syringe. She moved with a terrifying cavalier speed, completely lacking the measured, cautious precision of a trained medical professional. The procedure lasted less than 20 minutes. When she was finished, she handed the woman a small handheld mirror. The client inspected her slightly swollen, reddened face and nodded in satisfaction. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, reached into her designer handbag, and retrieved a thick, heavy envelope. She handed the envelope directly to Monica. Monica did not offer a receipt. She did not ring the transaction into a point-of-sale system. She eagerly opened the flap of the envelope and quickly thumbed through a massive stack of crisp $100 bills. It was thousands of dollars in pure, untraceable cash. She stuffed the thick wad of currency into the front pocket of her white lab coat, flashed another brilliant, empty smile, and escorted the woman back down the hallway toward the rear service door. The full, sickening scope of her criminal enterprise crystallized in my mind. This was a highly lucrative, entirely tax-free, massive cash operation operating completely under the radar. And it did not stop with that single client. Over the course of the next 4 hours, I sat glued to my laptop monitor and watched a steady, unrelenting stream of suburban women sneak through my back door. 3, 4, 5 different clients arrived in quick succession. They all followed the exact same routine. The hushed greetings in the kitchen. The dangerous, unregulated injections under the harsh ring light in my master suite. The exchange of thick, heavy envelopes packed with illicit cash. By the time the sun began to set behind the Colorado mountains, Monica had easily collected over $10,000 in completely unreported illegal income. The depth of her sin was absolutely unforgivable. This was the true reason she needed the deed to my house so desperately. This was the reason she had to push me out of the master suite. She needed a massive private secure location, situated in a wealthy neighborhood, to run her underground medical spa without drawing the suspicion of local law enforcement or nosy landlords. She had turned my sanctuary, the very place where I had mourned my late wife, into the staging ground for a sprawling felony operation. I felt a cold, diamond-sharp focus settle deep within my chest. The anger was no longer a hot, blinding fire. It was a precise surgical instrument. I reached over and pressed the save button on the cloud server application, ensuring that every single second of the high-definition footage, every exchange of cash, and every illegal injection was securely downloaded and backed up to my encrypted external hard drive. I was building a mountain of irrefutable, completely damning evidence. They thought they had committed the perfect crime. They believed that by forging my signature and bullying an old man out of his bedroom, they had secured their financial future forever. They had no idea that they were currently starring in their own prosecution documentary. I watched Monica cheerfully wipe down her stainless steel medical cart with the disinfectant wipe humming a cheerful pop tune as she counted her massive stack of illicit cash one final time before shoving it into a hidden drawer in the closet. She looked so incredibly proud of herself. She looked like a woman who believed she had conquered the world. I closed my laptop screen, the sudden darkness reflecting my cold, determined expression. The time for observation was rapidly coming to a close. I had all the ammunition I could possibly need. Now I just had to wait for them to make their final, most arrogant mistake. The setting sun completely vanished behind the jagged peaks of the distant Rocky Mountains, plunging my hotel suite into deep shadows. I had spent the last 2 hours pacing the small room, running through every legal maneuver that Mitchell Barnes and I discussed. The sheer volume of illicit cash I watched Monica collect earlier was still burning a hole in my mind. I needed a break, but my instincts, honed over 40 years of cutthroat commercial development, refused to let me simply power down the hidden surveillance network. I walked back to the wooden desk and tapped the spacebar. The monitor flared to life, casting a harsh, pale light across my face. I clicked the mouse and switched my own primary focus away from the gutted master bedroom and directly over to the high-definition feed, broadcasting from the kitchen. The gourmet kitchen was a space my late wife Evelyn meticulously designed. She chose the imported Italian marble for the central island. She picked the custom cherry wood cabinets because they reminded her of her childhood home. We had hosted decades of holiday celebrations in that exact room. Now it served as the staging ground for my son and his wife to plot their hostile takeover. Derek was leaning heavily against the marble island, his posture tense. He had loosened his expensive silk tie and rolled up the sleeves of his tailored shirt. A half-empty bottle of expensive red wine sat open on the counter between them. Monica was pacing across the hardwood floor holding a delicate crystal glass. She had changed into a luxurious silk robe, but the arrogant, predatory energy she displayed while injecting her clients was entirely gone. She looked frayed, anxious, and deeply agitated. I slowly reached over and turned up the volume on my computer speakers to maximum, ensuring that the highly sensitive motion-activated microphone hidden perfectly inside the espresso machine captured every single syllable without any distortion. The resulting audio was absolutely terrifyingly crystal clear. "I cannot keep doing this out of the house forever, Derek," Monica snapped, her voice tight with mounting panic. She stopped pacing and slammed her wine glass down onto the marble countertop, the sharp clinking sound echoing loudly through my computer speakers. "Do you have any idea how stressful today was? I had 6 different women cycling through the back door. 6. If just one of those wealthy, gossiping housewives gets suspicious, or if one of their husbands decides to ask too many questions about where they are getting their cosmetic treatments, the medical board is going to descend on this estate like a swarm of locusts. I am taking all the physical risk here while we wait for your bank to clear the paperwork." Derek ran a trembling hand through his hair, letting out a long, frustrated sigh. "Just calm down, Monica," he replied, his tone laced with a pathetic mixture of exhaustion and irritation. "You are the one who wanted to expedite the timeline. You are the one who said we needed the initial cash flow to cover the equipment costs. The commercial equity loan is moving through the final underwriting stages right now. I spoke with the senior loan officer at the bank this morning. They are just finalizing the appraisal on the estate. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes narrowing. A commercial equity loan. The pieces of their fraudulent puzzle were rapidly interlocking into a horrifying, perfectly clear picture. They are taking too long. Monica fired back, pointing an accusatory finger at my son. We transferred the deed into my name specifically so we could leverage the property value and secure that $1 million commercial line of credit. I need that money to secure the lease on the downtown commercial space. I need to open a legitimate, fully licensed aesthetic clinic before someone catches on to what I am doing in your father's bedroom. I cannot build a permanent $1 million wellness empire while sneaking women through a residential side door like a common criminal. The sheer magnitude of their premeditated conspiracy hit me with the force of a freight train. They had not just stolen my home to avoid paying rent or to claim a larger bedroom. They had legally hijacked a $2.8 million asset, owned entirely free and clear, to use it as collateral for a massive commercial business loan. They were liquidating my life's work, the absolute foundation of my retirement security, to fund Monica's vain, desperate attempt to become a legitimate corporate CEO. Derek poured himself another generous glass of red wine, spilling a few dark drops onto the pristine white marble. "You think I do not know the risks we are taking?" He shot back, his voice rising in volume, echoing off the cherry wood cabinets. "I am the one who committed the actual felony to make this happen for you. Do you think it was easy for me to sit at this very island night after night practicing my father's signature on a legal pad until my hand cramped? I spent 3 weeks analyzing every single loop and slant of his handwriting just so I could forge that quitclaim deed perfectly enough to fool the county clerk." My breath caught in my throat. I reached forward and double-checked that the cloud server was actively recording the audio feed. Every single word was being digitally preserved in pristine high-definition quality. And let us not forget about Jason. Derek continued, his face flushing red, with a mixture of wine and defensive anger. I had to pay my buddy Jason $10,000 in cash just to use his official notary stamp on the fraudulent transfer documents without asking any questions. If this entire scheme goes sideways, Jason loses his notary license. You go to prison for practicing medicine without a license, and I go to federal prison for real estate fraud and grand theft. So do not stand there and lecture me about carrying the burden of risk. We are both in this straight up to our necks. Monica crossed her arms over her chest, her expression hardening into a cold, unsympathetic glare. "We would not have had to resort to forging documents if you had just been a man and convinced your father to invest in my business legitimately," she sneered. Derek let out a bitter, mocking laugh. "Are you completely delusional?" he scoffed, taking a large gulp of wine. "My dad is a stubborn old fossil. He is obsessed with his precious corporate legacy and his outdated sense of financial caution. He would never have handed over $1 million to fund a cosmetic clinic. He was holding back our future. He was sitting on a gold mine, acting like he was going to live forever, dispensing his little lectures about hard work and fiscal responsibility while we suffocated under the weight of an average income. I was tired of waiting for my own inheritance. We needed the capital now, Monica. The only way to launch your brand and secure our financial independence was to take control of the asset while he was out of town and legally eliminate him from the equation. He is too old and too trusting to ever figure out how we structured the financing." I sat perfectly still in the sterile hotel room, listening to the echoing silence that followed his vile declaration. My own son had just summarized my entire existence as a stubborn old fossil. He viewed my 40 years of relentless sacrifice, the blood and sweat I poured into providing him a debt-free life, as nothing more than a temporary roadblock, preventing him from stealing his unearned inheritance. He had rationalized his felony as a necessary business transaction. I did not feel a single ounce of paternal sorrow left inside my chest. The final remnants of my fatherly compassion completely evaporated instantly, replaced by the cold, mechanical precision of a corporate executioner. I reached out and pressed the save command on my encrypted software interface. The digital progress bar flashed across my screen, confirming that the entire conversation was securely locked into the offshore cloud server. I now had them on tape explicitly admitting to premeditated real estate fraud. I had a recorded confession of felony forgery. I had audio evidence of a corrupt notary payoff, and I possessed multiple hours of clear, high-definition video proving Monica was illegally practicing medicine and injecting unregulated black market neurotoxins inside my family home. The trap was fully constructed, perfectly baited, and heavily armed with undeniable evidence. They had handed me the absolute, unmitigated power to systematically destroy their lives, their finances, and their freedom completely. I slowly closed the laptop screen, instantly plunging the quiet room into total darkness. The time for my silent observation was now officially over. I was fully ready to return to my estate and actively initiate the final devastating sequence of their corporate and personal annihilation. I checked out of the discreet boutique hotel early Friday morning, leaving the secure cloud server running continuously in the background. The drive back to my sprawling suburban estate was a masterclass in psychological compartmentalization. I had to seamlessly transition from the cold, calculating corporate executioner back into the oblivious, grateful, and slightly weary 70-year-old father they expected to see. I parked my luxury sedan in the circular driveway and grabbed my small leather overnight bag. Taking a deep breath, I relaxed my shoulders, softened my jaw, and walked through the heavy front doors. Derek and Monica were sitting at the marble kitchen island, drinking coffee and poring over a glossy stack of floral arrangement catalogs. They looked up, their expressions instantly hardening into masks of cautious apprehension. I gave them a wide, cheerful smile, setting my bag down on the hardwood floor. I told them that my trip to Boulder was absolutely fantastic. I lied smoothly, recounting fictional stories about catching up with my old fraternity brother and enjoying the crisp mountain air. I told them the time away had been exactly what I needed to clear my head and rest my aching back. The sheer, overwhelming wave of relief that visibly washed over their faces was almost pitiful to witness. They bought the performance completely. Monica immediately seized the opportunity provided by my supposed good mood. She stood up, smoothing the fabric of her expensive designer blouse, and walked toward me with an arrogant, triumphant gleam in her eyes. "Harrison," she beamed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I am so glad you are feeling rested, because we have some incredibly exciting news to share. Since the house transition went so smoothly, and because my new wellness project is officially taking off, we decided to host a celebration. We are throwing a massive brand launch and housewarming party tomorrow night." I blinked, maintaining my carefully constructed facade of mild confusion. "A housewarming party?" I asked gently. Monica laughed, a bright, trilling sound that grated against my nerves like shattered glass. "Yes. Well, a transition party," she corrected herself smoothly. "A way to officially introduce my new aesthetics brand to the local community and to celebrate our new chapter in this beautiful home. I have invited 50 of the most prominent local socialites, business owners, and potential clients from the neighborhood. It is going to be an absolutely spectacular evening." Derek chimed in from the kitchen island, his chest puffed out with unearned pride. "The bank called this morning, Dad. The commercial equity loan is moving into the final approval stage. We are just waiting on the final signature from the underwriter. Everything is falling perfectly into place. This party is the ultimate networking event to guarantee Monica's business launches with a massive, profitable waitlist." I looked at my son, marveling at the sheer depth of his delusion. He truly believed that forging my signature and paying off a corrupt notary had magically transformed him into a successful, self-made entrepreneur. He actually believed that he had outsmarted a man who had spent 4 decades dismantling hostile corporate takeovers. "That sounds wonderful, son," I said, keeping my tone warm and supportive. "I am very proud of you both for taking such a bold initiative. I will be sure to stay out of your way while you prepare for the big event." I walked down the hall to the cramped guest suite, closing the door behind me. The moment the latch clicked, my warm smile vanished. The trap was perfectly set. They were actively constructing the very stage upon which I would completely destroy them. Saturday morning arrived with a chaotic, frantic energy that completely shattered the usual peaceful tranquility of my estate. I stayed hidden in my small room, listening to the relentless parade of service industry professionals invading my property. By noon, a fleet of white catering vans had parked in my long circular driveway. I walked out into the main living area and watched in silent, simmering anger as a team of hired caterers systematically took over the gourmet kitchen. These were strangers casually tossing stainless steel prep pans onto the imported Italian marble countertops that Evelyn and I had personally selected 20 years ago. They were forcefully shoving trays of expensive artisanal hors d'oeuvres into the custom cherry wood refrigerators I had purchased with my own hard-earned money. The sheer violation of the space was profoundly staggering. Monica was pacing back and forth across the hardwood floors holding a clipboard and barking sharp, aggressive orders at the catering staff. She was treating them with the exact same dismissive, condescending arrogance she had directed at me just a few days prior. She was fully playing the role of the wealthy, entitled aristocratic homeowner, completely oblivious to the fact that she was standing on a foundation of felony fraud. As the late afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the sprawling manicured lawns, the musical entertainment arrived. I stood by the large bay windows and watched a professional string quartet carefully set up their instruments in the center of the outdoor garden. This was not just any garden. This was the sacred, quiet space where Evelyn had spent hundreds of hours meticulously planting her prized hybrid rose bushes. It was a place of memory and mourning. Now it was being repurposed as a superficial backdrop for a criminal networking event. The musicians began to tune their violins and cellos, the beautiful classical melodies drifting softly through the open glass doors, creating a sickeningly elegant soundtrack for a celebration of absolute theft. I retreated to my temporary quarters to prepare for the evening. I did not put on a casual sweater or a simple pair of slacks. I reached into my leather overnight bag and extracted my most expensive, custom-tailored charcoal gray business suit. It was the exact same suit I wore when I closed a $60 million commercial real estate development deal 10 years ago. It was the armor of a man who commanded absolute authority. I paired it with a crisp white shirt, a dark silk tie, and my polished black leather dress shoes. When I emerged from the guest suite, the transformation of my home was entirely complete. The subtle, recessed lighting had been dimmed to create a sophisticated, moody atmosphere. Tall, slender crystal vases overflowing with imported white orchids rested on every available surface. The first wave of guests began to arrive promptly at 7 o'clock. They were exactly the type of people Monica desperately wanted to impress. There were wealthy suburban housewives adorned in expensive designer jewelry, local business executives wearing flashy luxury watches, and prominent neighborhood socialites holding delicate crystal flutes filled with premium champagne. They walked through my heavy front doors, marveling at the towering vaulted ceilings and the expansive multi-million-dollar architecture. They congratulated Monica on her beautiful home, completely unaware that they were standing inside an active crime scene. I did not mingle with the crowd. I did not introduce myself to the arriving guests or attempt to engage in polite, meaningless conversation. I walked directly over to my favorite high-backed leather wingback chair, positioned in the shadowy corner of the main living area. I sat down slowly, crossing one leg over the other, resting my hands calmly on the armrests. A passing waiter politely offered me a polished silver tray. I took a simple glass of sparkling water with a twist of lemon. I did not need alcohol. My mind required absolute razor-sharp clarity for the execution of the final maneuver. I became the silent, invisible observer in my own castle. I watched my son Derek standing near the grand stone fireplace, laughing loudly, with a group of investors pretending he was the master of this domain. I watched Monica floating through the crowd, her face glowing with triumphant pride, handing out glossy, expensive business cards for her unlicensed, highly illegal medical spa. She was soaking in the admiration and the envy of her peers. She truly believed she had won. She believed the $1 million commercial equity loan was a guaranteed certainty. She believed her future as a wealthy, respected entrepreneur was completely secure. I took a slow, measured sip of my sparkling water, feeling the cool liquid soothe my throat. I looked at the sparkling chandeliers, the polished hardwood floors, and the crowd of 50 people unknowingly celebrating a massive multi-tiered felony. The contrast between their arrogant joy and the devastating reality I held in my breast pocket was absolutely poetic. I sat quietly in the shadows, letting the classical music wash over me patiently, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The storm was coming, and it would be absolutely merciless. I was ready to unleash pure corporate hell upon them both tonight. I built my empire for 40 years, and I will protect it. The trap was finally ready. The ambient chatter of 50 wealthy suburbanites and the soft classical melodies of the string quartet suddenly gave way to a sharp, clear, and demanding sound. Monica was standing near the base of the sweeping, curved mahogany staircase that Evelyn and I had custom-ordered from a master carpenter in Seattle 3 decades ago. She raised her delicate crystal flute high into the air and tapped the side of it with a silver dessert spoon. The crisp ringing noise sliced through the dim, sophisticated lighting of the grand foyer. The musicians immediately ceased playing, lowering their polished wooden instruments in unison. The low hum of networking and superficial gossip died down as every single face in the expansive vaulted living area turned toward the source of the interruption. I remained perfectly still, nestled deeply within the shadows of my high-backed leather wingback chair. I did not shift my weight. I did not adjust the cuffs of my tailored charcoal gray business suit. I simply gripped the smooth, cold glass of my sparkling water and watched the performance unfold with the detached, analytical precision of a seasoned corporate predator. Monica took 2 deliberate steps up the grand staircase, elevating herself physically and psychologically above her carefully curated audience. She was wearing a stunning emerald green designer gown that hugged her figure tightly. A garment undoubtedly purchased with the illicit, untraceable cash she had generated by illegally injecting unregulated neurotoxins into the faces of unsuspecting women right down the hallway in my gutted master bedroom. She looked down at the sea of expectant, admiring faces, her own features practically glowing with a profound, unearned sense of aristocratic triumph. Derek stepped right up to the base of the stairs, standing faithfully by her side, like a loyal, obedient corporate henchman, puffing out his chest and beaming with a sickeningly proud, complicit smile. Monica waited for the absolute breathless silence to stretch for a few more seconds, expertly manipulating the dramatic tension of the room. She surveyed her guests, making deliberate, practiced eye contact with the most influential local socialites and the wives of prominent neighborhood business owners. Finally, she allowed a brilliant, entirely manufactured, and sickeningly sweet smile to blossom across her face. "I want to welcome each and every one of you," she began, her voice projecting clearly and confidently across the polished hardwood floors of my home. "Thank you so much for joining Derek and me on this absolutely beautiful, perfect Saturday evening. Tonight is not just a standard housewarming party. Tonight marks the official dawn of a brand new, spectacular chapter in our lives, and it marks the official, highly anticipated birthplace of my new exclusive luxury wellness brand." A gentle murmur of polite, encouraging applause rippled through the gathered crowd. Women in expensive diamond necklaces nodded approvingly, raising their champagne flutes in a silent, preemptive toast to her supposed entrepreneurial vision. I watched her soak in their admiration, feeding off their validation like a parasite. She was a woman who had never built a single legitimate business in her entire life, standing in a multi-million-dollar estate she had fraudulently stolen, accepting the praise of a community she was actively deceiving. The sheer, staggering magnitude of her narcissistic delusion was a marvel to behold. But the introductory remarks were merely the opening act of her grand theatrical deception. She needed to explain how a woman with zero income and a husband earning an average salary had suddenly acquired a sprawling, debt-free suburban castle without raising any suspicious eyebrows from their wealthy, judgmental peers. She needed a narrative that protected her image and buried my existence completely and utterly. She placed a perfectly manicured hand dramatically over her heart, allowing her bright, triumphant smile to soften into an expression of deep, manufactured, and entirely fake familial piety. As many of you know, she continued her tone shifting into a smooth, melodic, and patronizing register. Navigating the complex world of multi-generational family dynamics can be incredibly challenging, but also deeply, profoundly rewarding. My sweet father-in-law Harrison has lived in this sprawling property for a very long time. We love him so much. But recently, we all had to sit down and have a very difficult, very honest family conversation. She paused, letting out a soft, theatrical sigh, designed to elicit maximum sympathy from the audience. Harrison recently realized that managing an estate of this massive size was simply becoming too much for him to handle, especially with his failing memory and his rapidly declining physical health. The blatant, calculated assassination of my character hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I sat in the corner, my jaw locked. Listening to this 32-year-old amateur confidently broadcast a medical diagnosis of cognitive decline to 50 influential strangers. She was actively laying the public groundwork for my forced institutionalization, building a communal consensus that I was a deteriorating, incompetent old man who required her benevolent intervention. I watched the faces of the guests soften with misplaced compassion. A few women placed their hands over their mouths, murmuring quiet words of support. Derek nodded solemnly beside her, playing the role of the dutiful, burdened son, with absolutely flawless, sickening conviction. He looked down at the floor, feigning a heavy heart, completely validating her vicious, premeditated lies. They were working in perfect, seamless tandem to publicly erase my autonomy and legitimize their felony theft. And so Monica projected, her voice rising once again, reclaiming the triumphant, energetic tone of a conquering hero. He made a truly beautiful, selfless decision for the future of this family. Recognizing that I needed a large, secure, and prestigious headquarters to launch my new luxury aesthetics clinic, he graciously and completely voluntarily signed the deed of this entire estate over to me. She beamed, gesturing expansively with her crystal flute toward the vaulted ceilings and the towering windows. He handed over the keys so that I could finally build my empire. He wanted me to have the perfect foundation to create a legacy of beauty, wellness, and female empowerment. I took a slow, measured sip of my sparkling water, the cold liquid barely registering against the dry, burning fury lodged deep within my throat. The sheer audacity of her public declaration was almost hypnotic. She had explicitly and joyfully confessed to the ownership transfer in front of 50 independent witnesses, completely cementing her motive for the fraudulent quitclaim deed. She had unknowingly provided the ultimate, irrefutable capstone to the mountain of audio and visual evidence securely stored on my encrypted hard drive. She believed she was securing her social status and explaining away her sudden wealth. In reality, she was wrapping the legal noose tightly around her own neck and handing me the lever to drop the trapdoor. The crowd erupted into enthusiastic, resounding applause. The sound of clapping hands echoed loudly throughout the grand foyer, celebrating a theft wrapped in the guise of female entrepreneurship and family sacrifice. Derek reached up and affectionately squeezed Monica's hand, his face glowing with a pride that made my stomach physically churn. He raised his own glass toward the crowd, silently accepting their praise for a financial victory he had achieved exclusively through the cowardly forgery of his own father's signature. The guests began to cheer, raising their expensive drinks high into the air, toasting to the bright, prosperous future of the new queen of the Caldwell estate. I remained perfectly motionless in the shadows of the wingback chair, allowing the wave of unearned adulation to wash over them completely. I wanted Monica to experience the absolute dizzying pinnacle of her stolen success. I wanted her to feel the intoxicating, invincible high of having the entire room eating out of the palm of her hand. Because in the brutal, unforgiving world of corporate warfare, you never interrupt your enemy when they are in the process of exposing their vulnerabilities. You wait until they have climbed to the very highest, most precarious branch of their own ego. You wait until they are looking down at the world completely blind to the structural integrity of the foundation beneath their feet. And then only then do you cleanly and methodically chop the entire tree down to the very roots. The applause began to naturally taper off. Monica took a triumphant sip of her champagne, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, basking in the glorious, intoxicating validation she had craved her entire life. She was the undisputed ruler of the house. The moment was absolutely flawless. The stage was perfectly set. The trap was fully primed. I placed my glass of sparkling water down onto the polished wooden side table with a soft, definitive click. I adjusted the lapels of my tailored charcoal gray business suit, took one final deep breath, and prepared to dismantle her entire fraudulent world. It was finally time to introduce these foolish people to the true, undeniable owner of this stolen real estate. I did not clap. As the wave of enthusiastic applause washed over the grand foyer, celebrating the magnificent fairy tale my daughter-in-law had just spun, I remained anchored in the deep shadows of my leather wingback chair. I let the sound of clapping hands and cheering voices reach a fever pitch before I made my final decisive move. I placed my hands firmly on the polished armrests of the chair. With a slow, deliberate, and entirely calculated motion, I stood up. I did not rush the movement. I rose to my full height, taking a moment to smooth the front of my tailored charcoal gray business suit. The expensive fabric fell perfectly into place, creating a subtle but undeniable uniform of absolute corporate authority. For the past 2 hours, I had been nothing more than an invisible ghost haunting the periphery of my own home, a silent spectator to a grand, arrogant illusion. I had allowed Monica to command the spotlight, to bask in the stolen glory of her criminal achievements, and to feed her insatiable ego with the admiration of influential strangers. But as I stepped out from the dim corner and into the warm, ambient glow of the crystal chandeliers, the fundamental gravity of the room began to shift entirely. The transformation of the atmosphere was not instantaneous, but it was incredibly swift and absolutely fascinating to witness. It began with the guests standing closest to my corner. A wealthy suburban housewife adorned in a heavy diamond necklace caught the movement out of the corner of her eye. She turned her head, her polite applause faltering as she took in the sight of my stern, unyielding expression. She nudged her husband, a prominent local business executive, who also stopped clapping immediately. The silence began to spread outward from my position like ripples in a pond after a heavy stone has been dropped into the calm water. One by one, the 50 influential socialites populating my grand foyer lowered their hands. The enthusiastic cheers dwindled into confused, awkward murmurs. The sharp, celebratory clinking of expensive champagne flutes came to an abrupt, jarring halt. Even the professional string quartet, situated just beyond the open glass doors in the rose garden, seemed to sense the sudden, drastic change in the barometric pressure of the room. The cellist lowered his bow, and the beautiful classical melodies faded away into absolute nothingness. Within a matter of seconds, the sprawling living area went completely and utterly dead silent. The only sound left in the massive vaulted space was the slow, rhythmic, and heavy thud of my polished black leather dress shoes striking the Brazilian walnut hardwood floors. I began my walk toward the grand mahogany staircase. The crowd of elegantly dressed strangers instinctively parted before me, creating a wide, clear path directly through the center of the room. They stepped back respectfully, pulling their silk gowns and tailored jackets out of my way, their eyes wide with sudden, palpable apprehension. They did not know exactly who I was, but they could clearly feel the immense radiating wave of cold fury and undeniable authority rolling off my shoulders. With every single step I took, I felt the deep, profound history of the home beneath my feet. I remembered the day Evelyn and I stood on this exact spot, when it was nothing more than a concrete foundation and raw wooden framing. I remembered the decades of relentless, grueling work it took to afford the imported Italian marble countertops and the towering custom-built architectural features. I had poured my literal blood, sweat, and tears into the creation of this sanctuary. I had sacrificed countless weekends and worked through crippling physical exhaustion to ensure that my family would have an impenetrable fortress of financial security for generations to come. And I was absolutely damned if I was going to let a manipulative 32-year-old amateur and a cowardly, ungrateful son steal it all away with a forged piece of paper and a cheap theatrical speech. I kept my gaze locked entirely on the two figures standing elevated on the staircase. As I closed the distance crossing the final stretch of the grand foyer, I watched the glorious, triumphant arrogance completely evaporate from Monica's face. The brilliant, manufactured smile that had charmed the room just moments ago froze, then slowly cracked, giving way to an expression of genuine, unadulterated terror. The color drained rapidly from her cheeks, leaving her complexion a sickly ashen white beneath the glittering light of the chandeliers. She gripped the wooden banister so tightly that her knuckles turned stark white, her crystal champagne flute trembling violently in her other hand. She had expected me to remain quietly hidden in the guest suite, cowering in the face of her overwhelming social gathering. She had never, in her wildest, most arrogant dreams, anticipated that I would boldly step into the light and publicly challenge her fabricated narrative in front of the very people she was desperately trying to impress. Beside her, my son Derek appeared as though the floor had simply vanished beneath his feet. His chest, which had been puffed out with false pride just a minute prior, caved inward. He took a small, involuntary step backward, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy front door, looking exactly like a trapped animal desperately seeking an escape route that simply did not exist. I reached the very bottom of the sweeping mahogany staircase and stopped. I did not ascend the steps. I did not need physical elevation to establish dominance over the thieves standing above me. I stood firmly on the solid ground of my own home, planting my feet with the unwavering certainty of a man who held every single card in the deck and controlled every possible exit. I looked up at Monica, my eyes cold, piercing, and entirely devoid of mercy. The silence in the room was so incredibly dense it felt physically suffocating. 50 pairs of eyes darted nervously between the beautiful young woman in the emerald green gown and the imposing, tailored older man standing at the base of the stairs. I let the agonizing tension stretch for 5 excruciating seconds, forcing Monica to drown in the silent, terrifying anticipation of my next move. I wanted her to feel the immense weight of the catastrophe she had brought upon herself. I took a slow, deliberate breath, filling my lungs with the cool, conditioned air of the estate. When I finally spoke, I did not raise my voice. I did not shout or scream or let a single ounce of unrestrained emotion bleed into my tone. My voice was perfectly calm, smooth, and deeply resonant, echoing powerfully off the towering, vaulted ceilings of the grand foyer, ensuring that every single person in the room heard my words with absolute clarity. "That is a beautiful story, Monica." I stated, the crisp articulation of my words slicing through the heavy, stagnant air like a sharpened blade. I paused, letting the devastating implication of my statement wash over the captivated crowd. I watched a fresh wave of absolute panic completely consume her features. Her mouth opened slightly, but she was entirely paralyzed, unable to produce a single sound to defend herself against the oncoming storm. I held her terrified gaze, my expression locked into a mask of pure surgical precision, ready to execute the final maneuver. There is only one minor problem with it: the collective gasp that rippled through the assembled crowd of local socialites and business executives was entirely audible. The tension in the room instantly spiked to an almost unbearable stratospheric level. Guests exchanged bewildered, frantic glances, realizing simultaneously that they were no longer attending a simple corporate brand launch or a cheerful suburban housewarming party. They had unknowingly walked directly onto the front lines of a brutal high-stakes and incredibly vicious family war. The polished, sophisticated veneer of the elegant evening had been entirely shattered, exposing the dark, rotting criminal foundation hiding just beneath the surface. Derek swallowed hard, his face glistening with a cold sweat, his entire body trembling under the immense, crushing weight of his own profound guilt. He knew that the carefully constructed house of cards he had built with a forged signature and a corrupt notary was about to completely and violently collapse. Monica stood frozen on the staircase, the magnificent emerald green gown suddenly looking more like a tailored prison uniform. The walls of the estate she thought she had successfully stolen were rapidly closing in around her, trapping her in a nightmare of her own arrogant creation. I stood my ground at the bottom of the stairs, perfectly composed, heavily armed with undeniable evidence and fully prepared to drop the legal and financial guillotine on their entirely fraudulent existence. If you are ready for Monica to get exactly what she deserves, hit the subscribe button right now. Let's see how this plays out. The tension hung in the air like a heavy, suffocating physical weight. Before Monica could even attempt to formulate a coherent response to my devastating interruption, Derek lunged forward. He descended 2 steps, positioning himself defensively between his wife and me. His face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated panic. Sweat glistened on his forehead, catching the bright, sparkling light of the massive crystal chandeliers hanging directly above us. He raised his hands, palms facing outward, adopting the exact same patronizing posture he had used the day I returned from my long trip to Montana. "Dad, stop talking." Derek stammered, his voice cracking horribly in the vast space. He tried to force a light-hearted chuckle, but it sounded like a dry, desperate cough echoing in an empty cavern. "You are confused. You are just having one of your episodes again. Please, everyone, I sincerely apologize for this disruption. My father has been struggling with his memory lately, and the excitement of the party has clearly overwhelmed his fragile senses. Let us just get you back to your room, Dad. Everything is going to be perfectly fine. Just calm down and breathe." He actually reached out, attempting to gently grab my forearm and usher me away like a wandering, helpless patient who had escaped a hospital ward. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I simply shifted my weight and delivered a look so violently cold that his hand froze in midair, hovering inches from my tailored suit. For 3 long years, I had allowed this ungrateful boy to live under my roof entirely rent-free. I had paid his expensive university tuition in full. I had quietly covered the gaping holes in his extravagant, reckless budget without ever complaining once. And his ultimate repayment was to stand in front of 50 influential members of our local community and deliberately label me a senile, deteriorating old man. I ignored his pathetic, trembling hand. I ignored his desperate, sweating face. I reached inside the interior breast pocket of my charcoal gray business suit. My fingers wrapped around the thick, heavy certified legal document that Mitchell Barnes had expertly prepared for me earlier that week. I pulled the folded parchment out slowly, the crisp sound of the heavy paper unfolding, echoing sharply through the dead, silent foyer. Every single pair of eyes in the sprawling room locked onto the document. I held it up high, letting the official state seal catch the ambient light. I bypassed my son, entirely locking my gaze dead onto the terrified woman still frozen on the mahogany staircase. "You see, Monica?" I began, my voice perfectly level and projecting with the practiced, undeniable authority of a man who had commanded corporate boardrooms for 4 long decades. "You did not steal my house." The silence in the room deepened, transforming from mere shock into an electric, breathless anticipation. Monica blinked, her chest heaving as she struggled to draw oxygen into her lungs. I let the statement hang there for a brief moment, ensuring the immense, crushing weight of the words settled firmly upon her shoulders. "Because I do not own this house." I turned away from her pale, trembling face and deliberately addressed the crowd of 50 wealthy suburbanites. Many of these people were local business executives, commercial real estate developers, and seasoned corporate investors. They were highly educated individuals who understood the intricate, ruthless language of high-level finance. I wanted them to fully comprehend the absolute magnitude of the foolishness standing on the staircase. 15 years ago, I announced, projecting my voice clearly, to the very back of the vaulted room, my late wife Evelyn and I made a highly strategic financial decision to protect the legacy we had spent our entire lives building. We went to our attorneys, and we formally placed this entire $2.8 million property, along with several other commercial assets, into a protected corporate entity. We established the Caldwell Family Limited Liability Company. I paused, letting the complex legal terminology wash over the crowd. I could immediately see the dawn of realization sparking in the eyes of the businessmen standing near the catering tables. They knew exactly what an LLC meant for structural asset protection. I hold 95% of the voting shares in that corporation. I continued, turning slightly to gesture toward the sweating, defeated man standing just a few feet away from me. Derek holds the remaining 5%. That 5% was a gift from his mother, a small foundational stake meant to introduce him to the massive responsibilities of corporate ownership. I turned my undivided attention back to Monica. She was gripping the wooden banister so tightly it was an absolute miracle the polished mahogany did not completely splinter under the immense pressure. The grand, triumphant narrative she had just spun about an old man graciously signing over a deed was rapidly disintegrating into a pile of worthless dust. The emerald green designer gown she wore suddenly seemed to consume her, dragging her down into the terrible, suffocating reality of her own profound ignorance. I looked dead into her terrified, wide eyes. A personal quitclaim deed cannot legally transfer a corporately owned asset. I explained, utilizing the slow, deliberate cadence one might use to explain a very simple concept to a very slow child. It is a fundamental basic principle of corporate real estate law. You cannot personally give away something that belongs entirely to a corporate entity, even if you are the majority shareholder. Any transfer of this specific property requires a unanimous vote of the corporate board, a formal corporate resolution, and documents signed by the registered managing members on behalf of the LLC. Therefore, I said, taking a deliberate step closer to the base of the stairs, looking up at the arrogant woman who had illegally injected neurotoxins into patients in my home, your forged document is legally and entirely worthless. It is a meaningless piece of scrap paper. It cannot secure a commercial equity loan. It cannot be used as collateral for your underground wellness clinic. The bank underwriter you have been frantically calling will run the title through a standard corporate registry check, and they will immediately red flag your application as completely fraudulent. The final devastating truth hit her with the brutal, unforgiving force of a physical blow. The entire foundation of her grand, arrogant plan had just been vaporized in front of her friends, her potential clients, and her social rivals. She had risked federal prison for a document that carried absolutely zero legal weight. She let out a sharp, ragged gasp, a terrible sound of pure, unadulterated panic escaping her throat. But I was not finished yet. The trap had not yet fully snapped shut. I had one final fatal mechanism left to effectively deploy against them both tonight. The profound silence in the grand foyer was broken only by the soft, ragged breathing of my son. The 50 wealthy guests stood frozen in absolute shock, witnessing the brutal surgical dismantling of a criminal conspiracy in real time. Nobody dared to speak. Nobody dared to move. They were entirely captivated by the terrible, undeniable justice being executed before their very eyes. But what that forged document did do, I continued, my voice dropping into a cold, lethal register that completely paralyzed the entire room. According to the strict binding terms of our corporate operating agreement, is trigger an automatic bad faith clause. I held up the certified legal document, displaying the thick paragraphs of corporate bylaws Mitchell Barnes had meticulously drafted 15 years ago. When Evelyn and I established this company, we installed specific, uncompromising safety measures to prevent hostile internal takeovers or gross financial mismanagement by minority shareholders. Section 4 clearly states that any member who attempts to defraud the LLC, who commits forgery, or who attempts to illegally encumber corporate assets without authorization is acting in explicit bad faith. I turned my head to look directly at my son. Derek was openly weeping now. Silent, pathetic tears streamed down his pale cheeks, completely ruining his expensive silk tie. He understood exactly what those specific legal words meant for his entire financial future. By attempting to defraud the corporation, I announced ensuring every single syllable struck them with maximum devastating impact. Derek's 5% share is instantly voided and completely seized by the majority shareholder without any required compensation. He has been legally and permanently stripped of his equity. He has lost everything. I looked back up at Monica. Her jaw was trembling uncontrollably. Her eyes were completely vacant, staring deeply into the bottomless abyss of her own absolute destruction. "You did not steal a house, Monica," I whispered, delivering the final crushing blow with absolute merciless precision. "You just surrendered your husband's entire inheritance forever." The collective gasp that erupted from the 50 wealthy guests sounded like all the oxygen was being violently sucked out of the grand foyer. The absolute suffocating silence that had gripped the room just moments before was instantly shattered by a wave of frantic, panicked murmuring. Women in designer gowns took physical steps backward, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the staircase. Prominent local businessmen tightened their jaws, recognizing immediately that they were witnessing the catastrophic financial ruin of a family they had mistakenly believed to be their peers. The glittering, sophisticated facade of the evening had been entirely ripped away, leaving nothing but the ugly, rotting core of a massive criminal conspiracy completely exposed for the world to see. Monica stood frozen on the mahogany steps, her chest heaving violently beneath the fabric of her emerald green dress. For 5 agonizing seconds, she simply stared at me, her mind desperately trying to process the magnitude of the legal nuke I had just detonated. When the reality of her total defeat finally penetrated her blinding arrogance, she did not apologize. She did not express a single ounce of remorse for forging my signature or attempting to steal my life's work. Instead, she regressed into a state of pure, unadulterated, and childish hysteria. Her face contorted into a mask of furious, desperate rage. She gripped the wooden banister and began to shriek, the shrill, piercing sound of her voice echoing terribly against the vaulted ceilings. "I do not care about your stupid corporate bylaws!" she screamed, tears of pure frustration streaming down her cheeks, completely ruining her meticulous makeup. "I do not need your miserable, outdated house anyway. I have my own business. I have my own brand. I have a massive waitlist of loyal clients who love me. I will just take my wellness empire downtown and lease a commercial space on my own. I do not need your money or your permission to be successful." She turned wildly toward the bewildered crowd of socialites, frantically waving her arms in a desperate attempt to salvage her rapidly disintegrating reputation. "Please do not listen to this confused, bitter old man," she pleaded, her voice cracking horribly. "The launch party is still happening. My brand is entirely legitimate. We are just going to relocate our headquarters. Everything is perfectly fine." Before a single guest could formulate a response to her pathetic, unraveling display, a heavy, authoritative sound cut through the tense atmosphere. The heavy brass doorbell of the estate rang loudly. It was not a polite, hesitant chime. It was a sharp, demanding, and sustained ring that signaled the arrival of absolute, unavoidable consequences. The caterers standing near the kitchen entrance froze. The musicians in the garden stopped packing away their instruments. Every eye in the room darted toward the massive custom-carved front doors. I did not move. I maintained my position at the base of the staircase, a cold, satisfied calmness settling deep within my chest. I simply nodded toward the foyer, granting unseen permission for the final act of this corporate execution to commence. The heavy oak doors swung open. Mitchell Barnes, my ruthless corporate attorney, stepped over the threshold. He was wearing a sharply tailored navy blue suit, his expression hardened into a mask of pure, uncompromising legal authority. He carried a thick leather briefcase in his left hand. But Mitchell had not come to my home alone to simply deliver a civil lawsuit. Following closely behind my attorney were two stern, sharply dressed investigators, displaying the official gleaming silver badges of the Colorado State Medical Board securely clipped to their belts. They moved with the crisp, efficient precision of seasoned professionals who had conducted hundreds of medical fraud raids. Flanking the investigators were two fully uniformed officers from the Denver Police Department, their hands resting comfortably near their duty belts, their eyes scanning the crowded room to quickly assess the situation. The visual contrast of armed law enforcement officers stepping into an opulent high society suburban housewarming party was absolutely staggering. The remaining shreds of Monica's desperate bravado evaporated instantly. She let out a sharp, terrified whimper, stumbling backward up the stairs until her back hit the custom wallpaper. Derek let out a loud, pathetic sob, covering his face with his trembling hands, finally realizing that the protective bubble of his privileged life had just violently burst. I turned my back on the pathetic display on the staircase and addressed the silent, terrified room of wealthy suburbanites. My voice was calm, steady, and completely devoid of mercy. I built my entire career in the brutal world of commercial real estate, I announced, ensuring that my words reached every corner of the grand foyer. I know the intricacies of municipal zoning laws. I know exactly what constitutes a legal commercial operation. And more importantly, I know the severe mandatory felony penalties for practicing medicine and injecting highly dangerous, unregulated black market neurotoxins into patients without a valid medical license inside a strictly residential zone. The reaction from the crowd was instantaneous and absolutely chaotic. The elegant women who had previously toasted to Monica's entrepreneurial success suddenly turned pale with sheer terror. Several of them instinctively raised their hands to their own faces, their eyes wide with the horrifying realization that the cosmetic treatments they had received in secret were completely illegal, unregulated, and potentially highly dangerous. The wealthy husbands grabbed their wives by the arms, desperate to distance themselves from a rapidly escalating criminal investigation that could easily drag their own reputations through the mud. The party completely shattered. Guests practically trampled over one another in a frantic, disorganized rush toward the rear garden exits, and the side doors desperate to flee the property before the police officers began taking down names and demanding official statements. Mitchell Barnes calmly walked to the center of the room and handed a thick stack of official warrants to the lead medical board investigator. The investigator stepped forward, bypassed me respectfully, and ascended the mahogany staircase. Monica tried to scramble away, kicking off her expensive designer heels in a blind panic, but the staircase offered absolutely no escape route. The investigator calmly informed her that she was being placed under immediate arrest for multiple counts of practicing medicine without a license, operating an illegal medical facility, and severe violations of state health codes regarding the distribution of restricted neurotoxins. The two uniformed Denver police officers moved in swiftly. They instructed Monica to turn around and place her hands behind her back. I watched in cold, silent satisfaction as the cold metal handcuffs clicked securely around her wrists. The harsh mechanical sound of the locking mechanism provided the ultimate perfect conclusion to her arrogant reign. Her emerald green designer dress looked incredibly absurd as the officers escorted her firmly down the grand staircase. She was sobbing uncontrollably now, mascara running down her cheeks in thick, dark streaks, begging Derek to do something, begging him to call a lawyer, begging anyone to save her from the consequences of her own actions. But Derek was entirely paralyzed. My son stood frozen near the bottom of the stairs, watching his wife being led out the front door and loaded into the back of a waiting police cruiser. His entire world had been completely dismantled in less than 20 minutes. The fraud had been exposed. His corporate equity had been seized. His marriage was imploding under the weight of multiple felony charges. He collapsed onto the bottom step of the staircase, burying his face in his hands, weeping with the loud, unrestrained grief of a man who had lost absolutely everything because he believed he was smarter than the father who had given him everything. I did not offer him a comforting hand. I did not pat his shoulder or offer a single word of paternal reassurance. I walked past his trembling form and stepped out onto the wide, covered front porch of the estate. The cool Colorado evening air felt incredibly refreshing against my face. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruiser cast long, rotating shadows across the manicured front lawn. I walked over to the thick stone pillar near the entryway. Resting quietly in the shadows was a large, sturdy canvas suitcase. I had packed it myself earlier that afternoon, while the caterers were busy setting up the party. I had gone into the guest room, gathered Derek's most essential clothing, his toiletries, and a few pairs of shoes, and packed them neatly away. I picked up the heavy suitcase by its leather handle and carried it back into the foyer. I dropped it onto the hardwood floor, directly in front of my sobbing son. The heavy thud of the luggage against the floorboards forced him to look up. His eyes were red-swollen and filled with a desperate, pleading sorrow that I had immunized myself against days ago. I looked down at him, my expression completely neutral, my voice devoid of any lingering familial warmth. "You forged my signature," I said quietly, ensuring only he could hear the absolute finality in my tone. "You plotted to declare me incompetent. You allowed your wife to turn my home into a criminal enterprise, and you attempted to steal the legacy I built for your mother. I am not going to call the police on you for the forgery today, Derek. I am going to let you carry the immense weight of knowing you destroyed your own life entirely by yourself." I pointed toward the heavy front doors. "Take your bag. You have 30 minutes to vacate my corporate property. If you are not gone by the time the clock strikes, I will instruct Mitchell to file the forgery charges, and you will join your wife in a federal holding cell." Derek stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He searched my face for a single shred of hesitation, a single crack in my armor where he could insert a final desperate plea for mercy. He found absolutely nothing but solid, impenetrable stone. He slowly stood up, his legs shaking violently. He grabbed the handle of the canvas suitcase, lowered his head in total, absolute defeat, and walked out the front door, stepping into the dark, cold reality of the life he had just earned for himself. Fast forward 1 year. The sprawling estate is incredibly peaceful again. The changing of the seasons brought a profound sense of renewal to the property. The blinding, sterile white paint in the master suite has been completely covered by the warm, earthy tones that Evelyn always loved. My grandfather's heavy antique oak bed has been rightfully returned to its proper place, standing as a quiet, sturdy testament to endurance and history. The rose garden is blooming beautifully, completely free from the arrogant chatter of superficial guests and the taint of hidden criminality. Derek currently lives in a cramped, poorly insulated apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. He works long, grueling shifts, driving a forklift in a massive shipping warehouse. He has no luxury vehicles. He takes no weekend ski trips to Aspen. A significant portion of his minimum wage paycheck is heavily garnished every single month to pay off the massive legal fees he incurred attempting to defend himself during the corporate fallout. He is learning slowly and painfully the true value of a single dollar earned through honest, backbreaking labor. Monica did not fare any better. The Colorado State Medical Board made an absolute public example of her. She avoided a lengthy prison sentence by accepting a devastating plea deal, but she is currently serving 5 years of strict federal probation. She was hit with hundreds of thousands of dollars in severe medical malpractice fines and punitive damages. The superficial friends she tried so desperately to impress completely abandoned her the moment the handcuffs clicked. She was stripped of her fake glamour, forced to confront the hollow, empty reality of a life built entirely on theft and deception. I sit quietly on my wide front porch, holding a steaming mug of rich black coffee. The crisp morning breeze rolls down from the distant snow-capped Colorado mountains, carrying the fresh scent of pine and freedom. I watch the sun rise over the quiet neighborhood, feeling a profound, deeply settled sense of vindication resting warmly inside my chest. I successfully protected my hard-earned assets. I reclaimed the sanctity of my home. And above all, I fiercely defended the proud, honest legacy that Evelyn and I spent our entire lives building together. Thank you for listening to my story. Blood doesn't give anyone the right to steal from you. If this story resonated with you, please share it. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you found that forged deed? See you in the next life story. With love and respect.